Hey guys, Sajedene here. With another TI fast approaching, I thought it would be a good idea to make a video that talks about US visas in relations to esports. Hopefully this video could answer some of the questions and address some of the misconceptions that I've seen floating around when it comes to getting a US visa in the esports industry. I made a hopefully easy to understand slide presentation that introduces you to the various visas used, how teams and players go through the application process, and why some get denied entry into the United States. While the information I have here mostly uses Dota 2 teams and players as well as US-based events such as the International as examples, since it is the scene that I work in the most, everything I talk about does apply to other esports and US-based esports events as well, and can even give you a general idea of how it applies to other countries. With that, let's begin. This is the title slide, as you can see, Esports and US Visas 101 by Nikki Sajedene, which is me. And for those of you guys who found this video for the first time and are like, well, who the heck are you and what gives you credentials to talk about this information, I'd like to introduce myself right now and say like, hi, I'm Nikki. I've been working in the entertainment industry for a very long time now. I was a talent agent in Hollywood for about 4 years. I represented actors for television and film. So I'm actually very familiar with getting visas for them as far as them coming to the US and filming movies or filming television shows. After that, I transitioned into esports. I worked with a lot of players, working on their contracts and working on even getting them visas. I worked as a manager for a while as well. And now I work as an esports agent. I represent players and personalities in various games, doing the same thing, working on their contracts, working on their visas, and getting them sponsorships. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of this video, let's talk about some of the important bodies that are involved in the visa application process. You have the applicant, which is typically the player that applies for the visa, but that also does apply to your hosts and your commentators that are foreign nationals that come to the United States to participate in the event. Then you have the sponsor, petitioner, or host, which is typically a team organization such as the Complexity or Valve themselves who are hosting the international. The next three that I'm going to talk about is USCIS, US Embassy, and CBP. Typically, a lot of people tend to confuse the three, but they are three very separate entities that are all equally important in applying for the visa process. You have immigration, the consulate, and the border patrol. Most of the visa applicants will be dealing with the embassy or the consulate in their country. They will be the ones deciding whether they are going to be granted a visa. Depending on the visa, especially if you're applying for a P visa or an O visa, which I will get into shortly, you will also have the involvement of immigration, who will approve that petition prior to sending it to the consulate. And everybody will have to go through CBP or Customs and Border Patrol or Protection once they set foot in the United States. This is that part in the airport where you go through where they stamp you and they decide how long you're actually allowed to stay in the United States. Now, there are many types of visas that you can apply for when coming to the United States. However, these are the ones that we're going to talk about that apply to esports. You have the B visas, the P visas, and something that we haven't really seen in esports yet is the O visa. And as you can see on the slide, I put in special mentions, which is the ESTA and the EVUS. Let's start with the B visa. The B visa, typically referred to as a B1 visa, which is the business visa, and the B2 visa is the tourist visa. This is typically the visas that teams from EU and China apply for. So teams like OG and Planet Dog, they will be applying for or have already acquired a B1, B2 visa, which allows them to come to the US and compete for prize money only. I put emphasis on compete for prize money only because you cannot have a B1, B2 visa if you are in the United States earning a salary from a US-based organization. That is the reason why teams like Complexity have applied for P1 visas for their players before. Any player that is in the United States earning a salary or any form of stipend from a US-based org under this sort of visa is actually in violation of those visa terms and could get themselves in deep trouble. So be wary. ESTA is another way for a lot of EU players in particular to come and participate in events like the international, because if they are one of the 38 countries that fall under the visa waiver program, which is a partnership that the United States has with some of these countries, then they are allowed to come in for as long as 90 days once they are cleared by Border Patrol. EVUS is a registration that is required for any B visa holder from China that has a duration of 10 years. Nothing special gained for that. Anybody having an ESTA or being registered under EVUS still follow the same rules that apply to the B visas, which means you cannot be salaried or earn any wages or stipends from any US-based organization. Next is the big boy, the P visa. These are for athletes, artists, entertainers who are needed to perform in a specific competition or event. Teams that you've seen that have done this are Complexity, Planet Odd, formerly known as Digital Chaos, and League of Legends players that are sanctioned by Riot. It is most likely that the Overwatch League will have to apply for P visas for their players as well if they will be competing and salaried here in the United States when they play. The P visa is definitely a lot harder to apply for versus the B visa. One of the things that you need to be able to show is that you are internationally recognized and successful in the event that you are participating in. That's why it's actually very important for players to do as much press and media as they are able to, because that actually helps you in your application process. Another very, very important distinction between a B visa and a P visa is that before, in a B visa, the individual player or personality is the one going through the application process with the embassy. However, for a P visa, it is now the team, organization, or the event organizer who has to be the one to file a petition with immigration services to say that we would like to hire or we would like this person to compete at our event. Typically, a P visa is tied to the organization that is filing the petition, which means as a player, if you are no longer a part of that organization, there is a good chance that your P visa is also no longer valid as well. The good thing about a P visa is that it now allows the player to earn a stipend or a salary while under contract with that org, as a P visa is a temporary work visa. And the last visa that I'm going to talk about is the O visa, which I actually haven't really seen much, if at all, in esports, but I did see it quite often while working as a talent agent in Hollywood. And this is for extraordinary ability or achievement. It is pretty much a P visa, but supercharged. It's typically used for actors on film or contracted athletes in some of the major franchises like the NBA and the NHL. And with more and more sports organizations such as the Sacramento Kings, the Patriots, and all of the teams that are currently participating in the NBA 2K League entering esports, it's only a matter of time for the O visa to start making its way into the esports industry as well. Now that we've gone over the different types of visas, let's quickly go through the application process. It's pretty standard. Gather the necessary documents, fill out the proper forms, go to the embassy or immigration services and file your application. An officer will go through that application, decide if you're approved or denied, or if you need to be interviewed. If you need to be interviewed, you will go through the interview process. Once they do that, they go through your application again, and then they will tell you you are approved or denied. The length of approval time depends on a few things. What country you're applying from, as well as what visa you are applying for. Some countries are just faster than others, like the EU is probably faster than applying in Southeast Asia. The kind of visa you're also applying for is definitely a big contributing factor. Applying for a B visa versus applying for a P visa is a completely different process because of the involvement of immigration services. When Complexity and Digital Chaos both applied for their P visas for their players, they had to time it perfectly, because once the process kicks in, which takes about a minimum of 3 weeks, those players that are applying for these visas actually cannot enter or leave the United States depending on where they are at that time. Otherwise, it resets the application process. Getting an RFI or a request for information from an immigration or consulate officer actually prolongs the process even longer, which is what happened to Execration during Boston when they got RFI'd twice while they were trying to apply for their visas. Let's talk about some of the typical reasons why someone gets their visa or entry denied. Recently, we've seen that a couple of players from LGDFY have had their visas denied. Monet has actually applied for a visa before for Boston, was denied back then, and needed help from Valve to get his visa processed through. And even back at TI5 with Navi Soneko getting denied 3 times before Valve had to step in. A lot of these players get denied because they hit the flight risk red flags. They are young, they don't have ties to their home country, and the country that they're applying from are typically countries that the United States sees as a flight risk. Young is pretty self-explanatory. You're in your teens up to your early 20s. They expect you to be in school. However, you're now traveling to another country with the potential of winning some money, which could allow you to live on your own in the United States. Not having ties to your home country typically means not having a family or property or work back home to show that you have a reason to go back. In the country that you are applying from, if it's typically a war-torn or a third world country, it is seen as that you are probably trying to leave it to make a better life for yourself here in the United States. Filing for the wrong visa or being told that you must reapply for a different visa are another reason for denial. This is what happened to Execration in Boston, which I'll go into more detail shortly. Failing your interview either at the embassy or at customs is another way to get denied entry into the United States. Another reason for denial that I've been seeing more recently has been the lack of support or knowledge from the petitioning organization. Now that a lot more teams and players are being required to apply for a P visa instead of just a B visa to participate in US events, the obligation has now shifted from the players and teams to the event organizers themselves, who now have to be the ones to petition and apply for these visas with USCIS. This is not something that used to be done before, is now something that's going to be a lot more common for events like the International, DreamHack, the Summit, as well as any future LAN events that will be held here in the United States with the introduction of the majors and the minors. Why is that, you ask? Because there is an issue with esports. Some countries recognize esports as a sport and some do not. Some countries recognize some esports as a sport while others do not apply to it. We've come a long way to be recognized as a sport, but with that comes some complications. Now that some consulates and countries consider esports a sport, they no longer consider a B visa enough and now require the players to apply for a P visa. Just the mere fact that they are now competing in what is considered a sports category, that they are now required to get an athlete visa. This is something that Execration, TNC, even some of the newer applicants coming from China are going to start seeing when they apply for a visa, that a B visa is no longer enough. Execration, when they qualified for TI6, were told that they cannot just apply for a B visa, they have to apply for a P visa, which is an athlete visa, even if they are not currently employed or contracted by a US team. But the mere fact that they are coming to the United States competing under a tournament organizer that is US based warrants them to apply for a P visa. For TI6, Execration was actually granted an emergency P visa. They were only given 15 days, which was more than enough time for them to play. However, when they qualified for Boston, it was the same issue once again. The problem with something like this is that as a team, it is quite frustrating because, as I mentioned earlier, the obligation for application is no longer just on your shoulders. That, on top of being RFI'd twice, contributed to them eventually having to miss the major. When Clutch Gamers qualified for Epicenter, despite not being in the United States, they were still told that they needed to get some sort of athlete visa to attend the event. Epicenter actually had to be the one to petition and apply for the process, which they happily did, and allowed Clutch Gamers to compete in their tournament. With more and more consulates now requiring players and teams having a P visa instead of just a B visa, the burden of obligation now shifts from the teams having to apply to the tournament organizers having to apply. With this happening, more and more teams and players are going to have to rely on organizers like Valve and BTS to petition and do the legwork for their application process. On the opposite side of the spectrum, there are still officers in embassies and Border Patrol that do not see esports as a legitimate sport, or do not even see it as a valid form of competition. The lack of knowledge and information, as well as understanding of what esports is, usually leads these officers to deny the person's application, which is, I believe, what happened to Monet last year. I hope this video was not too confusing and overwhelming for you guys, and I hope that I was able to address some of the questions and misconceptions that have been floating around regarding the visa application process. Always remember, if you are someone or know someone that is having to apply in esports, that you get your proper visa documentation. Apply as soon as you can and make sure you're applying for the proper visa. If you are able to and can afford it, speak to an experienced agent or lawyer, and pray to our Jesus that the officer that you get going through your application process has an open mind and approves it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys next time.